Welcome to a live special, extra special live edition of the Spike podcast at the Battle of Ideas. If you don't know me, I'm Fraser Myers, the host. We're joined as ever by Tom Slater, editor of Spike.
Hello.
Brilliant Kathleen Stock.
Hello.
And the wonderful Graham Linehan.
Hello.
We will have... give him a round of applause. We will also be joined by Rakib, Ehsan, but he's slightly delayed. He might have been caught up in the trans protests. Or did people make it past the pup mask guy okay? You're all here and safe, so I'm assuming so. Got loads to talk about today. We're going to be talking about what's going on in British politics. We'll talk about the US election. We'll talk a bit about the Middle East. But then after that, we'll have a chance to go out to you, the audience, so get thinking about anything that you might want to ask us to discuss. Tom, let's kick off. Let's talk a bit about the Labour government. I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently about, we've passed the 100-day mark.
Feels a lot longer.
Feels a lot longer. I think you could say it's not going very well. Is that a fair assessment?
I think you might be right. It's certainly that's certainly the mood at the moment. That's certainly the atmosphere. It's amazing how quickly everything has gone to pot for them. There was a poll a couple of weeks ago suggesting that half of Labour's votes at the election are now dissatisfied with how Keir Starmer is doing. And you see in the kinds of policies they're pursuing and the kinds of blunders that they're committing all the time that they really have no idea what they're doing. That's not just a kind of competence point. There's big political scandals that seem to hit them like an oncoming train without them realising, but also on the basis of politics. They've been doing the kinds of things that governments usually do at the end when they're thrashing around. They don't really know what to do. They want a legacy. They want to do something. It's ban smoking in beer gardens. Something else. There's a strange kind of rudderless quality to them. I don't think that's that surprising though, because Keir Starmer in particular, this is a man whose only really consistent political opinion has been that he would quite like to be Prime Minister. And now he's there. It's like the dog that caught the car, like he doesn't really know what to do and he's just holding on to dear life. So that's not to say they can't do a hell of a lot of damage in the process. And I think a lot of the policies they've been pursuing and are talking about are very damaging. But there's a rudderless quality to it, I think. And it's been amazing how quickly that's been exposed, I guess.
Yeah. Kathleen, what's your take on it? Why has it been so palpably rubbish?
I don't really know why. I mean, on some level, it's just the decisions that they've been making and the PR that's been accrued as a result. So they've just, like you say, made a series of baffling policy moves, I guess because financially they're so hemmed in every which way. So they do have to do sort of gestural things like smoking and whatever else they've done, which has gone off my head. But I think the fundamental vacuum at the heart of it is Starmer not really standing for anything. And I think that is clearly true. And especially if you look at what he promised in order to get the leadership compared to what he just reneged on all of those promises immediately. Now that Morgan McSweeney is back, he's now got free rein in a way he didn't have before because he was obviously in opposition to Sue Gray. I'm told by people that think they know that's Morgan McSweeney's got a blue Labour kind of agenda. It's very concerned with working people. It's relatively socially conservative. It sounds more voter friendly than the kind of weird scattergun liberal / authoritarian schizophrenia that we've been seeing. But who knows?
Yeah. Graham, I mean, what's your take on Keir Starmer? Is it just a void there? Is there anything behind the suit?
Well, he won't reveal it if there is. He's kind of like the continuity candidate or continuity prime minister in the sense that we've had a series of people who all feel like middle managers, who don't have any emotion, don't have any, as Kathleen said, don't have any great cause. They just are the right shape to fit in to prime minister. But what they don't realise is that that's not the right shape anymore. People are actually sick of these kinds of rulers. And I think that's, personally, I could be wrong, this may be too early to say this in the podcast, but I don't think Kemi Badenoch is that shape. And I think that she's probably going to be the first female black prime minister, simply because she feels different, to all these people who've come before. And, in the end, I think the public are going to say, well, if Labour and the Conservatives are the same, let's vote for the ones who think women exist.
Thinking about some of the sort of specific policies, Kathleen, you wrote a brilliant piece recently on assisted dying. This feels like, again, you do hear people saying, "Oh, hello, Rakib. Welcome, Rakib."
I apologise. Took the wrong turn on the circle line. My apologies for my lateness.
It feels like something. I was listening to someone earlier saying we're worried the Labour government's going to kill us, but there feels like there's no. Who's the constituency for it?
Yeah.
People feel strongly
Esther
against it. Yeah, Esther Rantzen. Keir's made a promise to Esther Rantzen. That's how we're deciding our policies now.
I mean, it feels to me like in their thinking, insofar as there is any thinking, they're harking back to the 90s. They're sort of vaguely remembering a period where Blair was like consorting with all these celebs and Dee Ream was playing and they were going to concerts and it was all really feel good. So they're going to Taylor Swift concerts and he's talking to Esther Rantzen, and he thinks that this is going to impress us. And we go, oh, Esther Rantzen wants it. All right, she can have it. But no, we're a lot more bolshy, a lot more discontented, a lot more suspicious of that bullshit. Or I know I am. And the assisted dying thing, I mean, that's inexplicable to me why at this early stage of the parliament of their regime they would want to back that. I don't know. It's been done in a ridiculous way. Like the legislation hasn't even been published yet. It's a private member's bill, so people are not going to be able to scrutinise it properly. It's being presented by its champions in Parliament as if it's we're all just being nice, which has my hackles up immediately. We should never, ever go into anything legislatively because it's being nice. Because, of course, whose interests does that serve? Who are we being nice to? And if we're being nice to this lot, we're probably being cruel to this lot. So all of it needs much more discussion than it will get. And yet I feel it's inevitability. I think it will come.
Being nice feels like, one of the gender wars problems.
Yeah, it is. It's in the same thing.
Nice.
Just be kind, just be nice, shut up, stop being so complicated.
Yeah. Rakib, we're talking about where it's all gone wrong for Labour so quickly.
Oh, mate, where do you start with that?
What's your take on it? Why is Keir so crap?
Well, there's many reasons. I think that when he was leader of the opposition, he focused on two main things. Very much breaking away from the days of Corbyn. They invested a great deal of time and energy in that, and basically just showing we're not the Tories. And I think that's very clear that might help you win an election, but it's not a very solid foundation to actually govern the country at large. And I think what's very clear is that they didn't invest the time and energy needed to develop a coherent programmatic identity. And I think the Prime Minister himself doesn't have a solid philosophical grounding of his own. Now, Liz Truss, for all her many flaws, she does have a philosophical grounding, one that I firmly disapprove of, and much of the country does. And I think that if you look at the first 100 days, it's quite bizarre. You're talking there about the sister dying, saying that he made a promise to Esther Rantzen, how the British Muslims in Luton who value sanctity of life would be impressed by that. I'm not particularly sure, to be honest. And I think that that's the problem, that with many of his core voters, they're actually traditional Labour voters. They're quite conservative on these kind of issues, actually. And it seems like the leadership of the Labour Party, they have no respect for that at all, whatsoever. And if you look at other decisions such as Chagos Islands, giving away sovereignty there, without any kind of serious parliamentary debate, there's a very serious matter of security in a very strategically sensitive part of the world. And I think that just the way they're carrying themselves, and then you have Allygate, all these donors where the Prime Minister doesn't seem to have much shame over the fact that another man is buying his wife's clothes. And I think you just think about, what traditional male working class voters think of this. It's almost like he's living on a totally different planet. He really is. And so I think that a lot has obviously gone wrong in his first 100 days. And I think that the worry is now for Labour is that the parliamentary majority was quite large, admittedly, but it's quite thin. I think that's what it is. So I think many people know that turnout was a very serious issue, probably the big story that came out of the last general election. 2 in 5 eligible voters did not participate in the last general election, which is quite astonishing, really. And then when you look at Labour's vote share, only 1 in 5 eligible voters actually voted for the Labour Party. Now, within that 19%, I wouldn't say the majority voted for Labour. It was a positive choice. We're very excited about the prospect of a Labour government coming in. It was more about getting rid of a very tired, beleaguered, ineffective Tory government. So I think the worry is that for the Labour Party is that they interpreted the result in an irresponsible way. They thought they might, we're wildly popular. They're absolutely not. And whatever public goodwill existed towards the Labour Party is burning through very quickly.
Yeah, so we were not gripped by Starmer mania.
No, Starmer mania.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
It wasn't that long ago now. Remember the first few days after he was elected? And
Hot, clear summer.
Yeah, it's a very good way of putting it. They were covering him, like the lobby journalists, like they were a cross between Pravda and Smash Hits. Like everything he said was hilarious. People wanted to talk about how he was settling in. Kathleen Moran wrote an article in which she said she was literally aroused by the elevation of Keir Starmer and his cabinet. I'm not sure if she's still in that particular state, but it was quite striking. But it's such a small layer of society were even slightly excited by this. And I think it was just because, particularly people in the media class, I think there has been this just residual sort of anti-Toryism, which goes beyond just opposing the politics of the Conservative Party. It's just this very thin, moralistic, liberal left tendency to just believe blindly that any alternative to those supposedly hateful Tories will be infinitely better. I think what they're finding out, and particularly a generation of younger people are finding out, that is a lot of nonsense in many respects.
To be fair, though, I think when Starmer came in and Kathleen Moran was writing that sort of thing, and actually I wrote an article called Hot Keir Starmer, but I was taking the piss, to be clear. What with the promise was competence. Like, he was untested. He looks competent. He's a former director of public prosecutions. He's a barrister. And when they were coming to power, they wouldn't say what they were going to do because they kept going on about how they were costing everything and they weren't going to commit themselves to things they couldn't do. And it all sounded like they were at least going to be competent. And in contrast to the Tories, who were just by that point just wildly, disastrously incompetent, they had a kind of promise about them to that extent. And obviously then the messaging went terribly badly because now everybody thinks they're just as bad. So they really have effed up.
Yeah.
Also, they walked into all these traps that a cannier politician, it seems to me, would have avoided, like just accusing, just taking Taylor Swift tickets, and it's I don't really see it as that big an issue. I think it's kind of good that people who have exalted position are seen at these things and kind of represent the country and so on, but. The fact that they've spent the last few years slagging off the Tories for the same thing, and then someone says, "Do you want Taylor Swift?" and say, "Oh yeah." Do you know what I mean? It's kind of it's a strange mistake for them to make, But yeah, I hope he continues to speak to celebrities though about policy. I want him to come out and say Timmy Mallet has asked me to unban fox hunting. So.
The Taylor Swift is funny. It's like she's become the queen or something. Every Labour MP has to have an audience with her. It's bizarre.
But I felt that there was a little, I felt that the storm around that was a little odd because, the fact that she had a police guard going to concerts. And it's like, well, remember what happened to poor Ariana Grande when she came here in our audience, So it felt to me like people were kind of conveniently ignoring.
And she'd had a death threat. I mean, there was a plot against her in Vienna.
Yes, they had to shut down one concert, and terrorists do love targeting women. So I felt that was a little bit of a misfire from his opponents.
I mean, Rakib, old governments have these kinds of scandals, but it is usually a kind of end of term thing when they kind of crop up. But more, I guess, more competent governments, more ideologically driven governments, they can sort of weather them bit. Why is it, because in relative terms, the Lord Allygate is probably much smaller scandal than some of the ones that were going on at the end of the last administration, but it has consumed them in this way.
I think a big problem is, as leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer promised a politics of duty, service, honesty and integrity, which has not been the case for all political leaders. I don't think Boris Johnson, for example, ever promised a politics of that nature. But Boris knows what he is. Yeah. He doesn't pretend to be anything else. And I think that's the problem. Because if you set those very high standards in terms of morality, ethics, and all the rest of it, well, we talk about two-tier governance. There seems to be a two-tier approach within the Labour Party when it comes to parliamentary standards. And I think that is a huge part of the problem. Perhaps, I don't think the public would be very forgiving in any case, but I think that the reason why people are particularly disappointed and indeed angry towards the Prime Minister is because he promised a certain brand of politics, this sort of holier-than-thou approach, and it's burst at the seams completely in his first 100 days. I think that's a big factor, actually.
One thing that was declared at the very beginning of the government is that the culture war is over. The culture secretary announced this, and it's just so we can all go. We've got to all go back home now. Tom, is it over? Have they saved us? They've solved all the issues.
No.
On this front.
I think it's just that comment I thought was so interesting because I think it was revealing of the fact that they really consider the culture war to be something which the other side, so-called, however conceived, started. It's something that everything was absolutely fine, whether it was on equalities issues, whether it was on various different issues in society. Things were trundling along in the mode of the consensus, a sensible, moderate view. And then there were these populists and these feeble-minded voters who were whipped up into a frenzy on issues of trans rights or the European Union. They lump every issue into the culture wars, even ones that don't necessarily fit. That's clearly not the story of the past few years. That supposed moderate consensus turned out to be not particularly moderate and in fact batshit crazy. And the moment in which sections of the public were given an opportunity to voice their displeasure, and they did, suddenly they were dismissed as culture warriors and mad and whipped up by demagogues. I think this is the culture war, though, broadly defined as one area in which we can expect things to get markedly worse under Labour. And I think that's not necessarily because people at the top of the party are dyed-in-the-wool culture warriors in the same way that some other people in the party are. I think the problem is that because of the emptiness at the heart of Starmerism, they latch on to these issues as a way to give them a kind of progressive gloss, a sense of meaning. And if you think about some of the things that are coming down the track with the Labour Party, things like the Race Equality Act, which would be kind of smuggling in basically kind of DEI ideology and putting it into statute, incredibly divisive and something which could have a real lasting effect on the country. I don't think that's because Keir Starmer has been spent years reading Ibram X. Kendi and thinking very deeply about his own white privilege, but he outsourced it to a little commission of people who do think like that, and they're going to produce the proposals that align with that agenda. So even though Keir Starmer himself is not someone who necessarily spends a lot of his time thinking about these issues, that's certainly the impression you get when he talks about them for longer than about 5 seconds. A man who believes in nothing can be a very dangerous thing. And I think on these cultural war issues, we're about to find that out in some respect.
I suppose at least we've negotiated Keir down from, any woman can have a penis to, only 1 in 1,000 women.
Yeah, which is still a lot of penises when you think about it,
Kathleen.
Again, I just think he's the sort of instinctive move in the absence of true belief in something is to rehearse the greatest hits of the 90s, especially as a lawyer. So you just think, oh, well, we've got the Equality Act in, it was great. So just let's do some more of that sort of thing. And it takes no account of the changing landscape in the interim and the fact that we're actually equalityed up to our eyeballs now where we weren't before, and the policy is vast and the ramifications of the Equality Act are vast in terms of all sorts of areas. So it's just really stupid, and people are fed up with it. It doesn't have the glow of sanctimonious, feel-good vibes that it might have once done. And I don't really understand why they can't see that, except for the reasons you just gave, that they've got nothing else and it's just cross your fingers and hope.
Starmer's basically like a walking tweet with the replies turned off. We know that Joan Smith, has spoken to him extensively about what's going on with trans issues and so on. And no response. She's never had a response. Rosie, of course, had to leave eventually Rosie Duffield, because she was just essentially, made to feel so unwelcome, and then she found her chance to leave. But the biggest thing about the culture war issue is everything they're doing at the moment is going to extend and make worse the culture wars. Like the university, the free speech bill that I believe they nixed because they were worried about Chinese students hearing about something called Tiananmen Square. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like things like that mean that what's going to happen is what's been happening for the last, certainly since 2015, is little explosions of where these rights clash, and they're just going to keep happening. And they've with that particular what do you call it, banning of the bill, veto of the bill.
Yeah.
But many more. You're going to see these, like, for instance, another good example is men and women's prisons. And they always say, no, it's fine because there's a series of checks and balances and all this sort of stuff. And what they mean is they're just leaving it up to individuals. And so there's going to be incidences like Isle of Graham and Scotland. There's going to be millions of them. So they're doing everything they can to expand the culture wars. Yeah.
Someone told us before we started this that this podcast actually gets through the CCP Great China Firewall of China, but not anymore now that you've mentioned. That's screwed my
audience for us.
That's big audience. Yeah. Rakib, what's your take on Keir and the culture war? Because he's not a natural culture warrior. I mean, he's quite,
Well, I don't really know what he is, to be honest. That's a big part of the problem. But just following up on the Race Equality Act, I absolutely agree with Graham that they're going to make the situation a lot worse, where you're going to have even some cases of de facto racial segregation as a result of this. So I'll give you an example. There's one provision in this proposed Race Equality Act talks about mandatory ethnic pay gap reporting. So, for example, if you have a exclusively white British firm in a rural area, the senior leadership of that firm is also white British, but they decide, actually, let's recruit some promising, talented, young ethnic minority workers. Let's bring them in, and that will actually help with their career development. If they're appointed in junior roles, even though that organisation has become more inclusive and is providing more opportunities for inner city, young ethnic minority people who are just starting out in their careers, it's not going to fare very well when it comes to ethnic pay gap reporting, obviously. So maybe that firm might think, I don't want to fall foul to these provisions. Maybe it's not such a good idea after all.
Yeah.
So actually what's happened there, you disincentivize them in terms of actually creating a more racially age-related, inclusive organisation. Yeah. Is that the outcome that the Labour Party is really looking for? And that organisation could be more inclusive in terms of age, in terms of class, and in terms of geography as well, because a lot of those kids might be from urban areas. The firm might itself be in more suburban, rural area. That's not the kind of outcome we want. And another thing is the Employment Rights Bill, introduced. The Deputy Prime Minister is very passionate about this. Now, there's some good things in there. For example, the right to parental and bereavement leave from day one, greater dismissal-related protections for pregnant women and new mothers, and also making flexible working from home arrangements the norm where it's practical, so parents can spend a bit more time with their children. I think that's quite good. But then you have provisions such as equality union representatives being able to take time off work for equality DEI related training. If there's accommodation costs related to that, the employer would have to cover it. And I think that's the problem, where you have some very good new proposals in there, but it's actually being used as a cloak to usher in a new era of DEI on steroids. And I think that's the problem. They're just unable to focus on the bread and butter, which could actually make them quite popular, because there's just that feeling that they have to engage in these cultural issues to appear overly inclusive, in a sense. In my view, overly inclusive. And they're so obsessed with that, they just can't focus on very traditional bread and butter progressive aims. They have to delve in a lot in this DEI, which is often, by the way, focused on race, when I think in the one area in terms of equality we do quite well as a country at large is race. While there's other protected characteristics such as disability, don't get a look in terms of DEI policy across the public and private sectors. So I think that is the real problem with the Labour Party. And I think this idea that they're talking about they've ended the culture war, I think they might exacerbate it.
The Workers' Rights Bill, interestingly, has this provision that people are calling it the banter police. Essentially, because you will have an employer will have to step in to make sure that you're not offended by any third party. So people are worried that in a pub situation, a barmaid will not be allowed to hear your raucous conversation, and you might have to be kicked out because then they will fall foul of this rule. I do want to move on to talk about the Tories. Remember them; they still exist. We haven't quite finished them off. Tom, what have you made of the race so far? There's no centrist candidate, which seems to have upset the media.
Yeah.
Not that there were, not that even James Cleverly was particularly centrist, but he was designated the soft one. Mm-hmm. What did you make of those two?
Well, I think it's interesting because even though they've ended up with these two candidates seemingly by accident, because there was a bunch of people in the Tory party, they often think they're playing like 4D chess, but they'd actually struggle with a game of plump. Like they really game in the system. We'll move it around. We'll get the right can, and they made a hash of it. But accidentally, they've ended up with two candidates who do speak to the issues of why the Tory party was so badly rejected last time around. Primarily because of the fact that they lost so many votes to reform, and in their different ways, both of these candidates have a kind of offer as to how they could win those voters back. That's the primary issue just as a party they have to confront. So that makes a lot of sense. And also the fact that even though these things are broadly speaking kind of right coded, a lot of these issues on which the Tory party have been seen to fail, but the public is still clearly do not believe Labour are going to sort out, whether that's issues of immigration, integration, a lot of the culture war topics that we've been talking about. Both of them at least recognise that is a problem that needs to be addressed. They're taking it in slightly different directions. You've got Robert Jenrick, who has become right-wing over the course of about the past fortnight, who voted Remain, was a kind of middle-of-the-road Cameroon, negative charisma. I really don't get it. I really don't understand it. Gareth Roberts, the very good writer, he wrote a piece for us saying that he's not only kind of archetypal Tory boy Robert Jenrick, he kind of screams like young man's first day at big school with his briefcase, and his hair combed by mother. He has that kind of vibe to him. I'm leaning into the ad hominems because I don't think there's actually a lot of substance there, to be honest. That being said, I think the fact that his success is based on him moving on those issues is significant. I think Jenrick's thing though, and this is probably partly because of the fact that he's most charitably, you could say, is a sort of recent convert, is that I think he misunderstands some of the concerns, say, about immigration, and almost buys into the Guardianista caricature of why people are concerned about immigration. So he's been known to engage in what I think are some quite unseemly bits of like vice signalling when he was in post at the Home Office, like this ridiculous situation where he was ordering the painting over of murals of Mickey Mouse in migrant reception centres for children, as if that's the biggest pull factor that exists in relation to small boats crossings.
And people really hate children as well.
No, exactly, yeah. We really don't want to help them fuckers. That's what people are thinking. It's ridiculous. Badenoch, she has shortcomings. That's definitely been shown up over the course of the past couple of weeks. I think she strikes people as very authentically cares about these issues. And I think between the two of them, she's actually got a clearer sort of record of, particularly when it comes to gender, particularly when it comes to critical race theory, broadly defined, of taking those issues seriously, of actually understanding them and actually taking a lot of flack for pushing back against them when it was very unfashionable to do so. And a lot of these so-called equalities issues, the Tory party were indistinguishable from the Labour Party until very recently. So I think that works in her favour, but it does seem like the gap between them is narrowing. So who knows what will happen in a few weeks' time.
Kathleen?
Jenrick, I cannot understand why anyone would vote for him. And that's not just anti-Tory animus. I just think he comes across, the vibes are all wrong. It's just more of the same kind of vaguely sinister persona. And he is obviously a careerist. If you track his progression, he's like Starmer. I mean, he's just saying what he needs to say. He's not hampered like Starmer is by the sort of duty to be a good person. So he can give, because the Tories don't particularly care about good people, or at least ones that wear that on their sleeve. I don't want to piss Tories off, but they don't care about virtue signalling, and he doesn't need to do that, and he can in fact vice signal, as you say. But Badenoch is fully herself and cannot be anything else. And people either really hate that or they like it. But I like it, just simply as a contrast. I do think there's something a bit shit about the situation. They were constantly like triaging who's the least worst person in relative relation to all these others. But Badenoch has many, many skills, and I think she has charisma. And I was a bit baffled when I saw the centrist dads and Labour podcaster types all like laughing their heads off, going, Badenoch, as if anyone's going to vote for Badenoch. I think they will. I think, well, I don't know if they are terrified of her yet, because I don't think they understand her appeal, precisely for the reasons we've given, that they're still lost in the 90s. But they need to wake up, because she's a real threat to them. And I would watch a PM Question Time with her in it, but I'm definitely not going to watch it if it's Jenrick versus Starmer.
Yeah, fair enough. Graham, I have a feeling you might be Team Kemi.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing about it is we on the left, as I used to describe myself, I'm not sure what I am now, but we've always said that people like Labour and the Democrats, they've just got these open goals, and all the right has to do is just lob them in, one after another. If Starmer stands across from Kemi, and there's, I don't know, so to use the prison thing again, there's some rapist led into a women's prison, she's going to decimate him, and she's going to decimate the whole culture around that, and it's going to change the UK for the better. Same with DEI, same with all these kind of feel-good, knee-jerk things that Starmer loves so much. It's going to be wonderful. I will certainly be watching Prime Minister's Question Time if she's on, because I want to hear broadcast all the things we've been saying, people who are, gender critical or whatever, for the last 5 years and haven't been heard, I mean, last week, the LGBT Alliance, I'm sure everyone knows, had there were thousands of bugs released at one of their conferences, and the BBC still hasn't reported on it. This is an attack on gay, lesbian and bisexual people. BBC couldn't care less. And I think Kemi's going to break through that deliberate cone of silence around many issues, and it's going to be great.
The stuff, the wrong kind of gay, lesbian and bisexual people, though, of course, with the wrong views. Rakib, your take on the Tories?
I think the leadership contest, I think that Badenoch is a very strong favourite in my view. But saying that, I think that if you look at the Tory leadership debate, I think the overall quality has been a bit poor, if truth be told. Now, that might be because they're ultimately looking to become leader of the party. They're trying to appeal primarily to their party base. But I think that the country, for example, it needs fresh and bold thinking on the economy. Because I just think we have an economic system which doesn't work for many people. I haven't heard much of that in the leadership debate. And I think there's a lot of talk about, we must reduce immigration. I agree with that. But then that also means there needs to be considerable public investment in terms of developing skills in the domestic workforce, improving educational standards. And this is what I mean by the bread and butter. The bread and butter of that has not featured very much in the leadership contest as well. Now, of course, that might develop over time. Whoever's the new leader, they'll develop their own alternative agenda for modern Britain. But I do think much of the debate surrounding even immigration within the Conservative Party, as Tom has observed, that's also of a pretty poor quality, to be honest. But I think that Kemi Badenoch's definitely favourite to win, but I think she needs to sharpen her messaging in certain areas. I think there's one example, she did an interview where she talked about a middle-class background, but then suddenly she became working class because she had a job at McDonald's, which is a fundamental misunderstanding how the traditional British class system works. And I think that's largely because, and I don't think this is a bigot state by any stretch of the imagination, but she did spend much of her childhood and the first stage of her life not in the UK. A lot of it was spent in Nigeria and the United States. So I think that what she'll need to do if she becomes leader of the opposition, she has to engage with local communities across the country to really understand how their life works. Because I think that's obviously, that's something that Labour's not very good at. And it's something that she could build an advantage for herself there. But I think it's very clear that in certain areas when it comes to socioeconomic inequalities, you have to engage with that. Cultural issues she's quite strong on, in my view. I think she's been fantastic in terms of challenging radical transgenderism, the threat that poses to admittedly sensitive spaces such as domestic violence sanctuaries, rape crisis centres, female-only hospital wards as well. I think she's very strong on that. I think she's also very strong in terms of tackling the particularly toxic elements of racial identity politics. She has a very positive message in terms of talking about opportunities for different racial and ethnic groups in the country. But a lot of those issues, if I'm being absolutely blunt, that they won't matter too much to a young white British working class lad in places such as Blackpool, for example. You need to engage with those kind of voters as well. And I think that the issue is that those kind of areas which voted very heavily for Brexit as well, they were promised this levelling up agenda, which, to be honest, the Levelling Up Fund, it was absolute crumbs. Just offering crumbs to working class communities across the country. And I think that if she wants to have a truly inter-ethnic, cross-class coalition which supports the Conservative Party, she has to engage with areas that she currently hasn't engaged with very much at all at the moment.
And I think her economic agenda is, insofar as I've been able to grasp it, is kind of like a reheated Thatcherism in lots of cases. That's not going to help the levelling up agenda.
They completely jettisoned that one insight Boris Johnson had. We have a few, to be fair to him, but if they were to hold on to this new coalition, they couldn't just continue to invoke the ghost of Thatcher at every opportunity. But yes, that seems to be gone now.
Jenrick's daughter's middle name is Thatcher, if people weren't aware. Or at least he claims it is.
That can't be a lie.
I mean, I know. It's crazy either way.
Her first name is Margaret.
Here at Spiked, we love to talk about ideas, from the big ideas to the bad ideas. I'm sure many of you at home have got a brilliant idea inside of you for the perfect business, but turning that idea into reality can be full of challenges. Luckily, the first step has never been easier, and it sounds like this. That's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the game-changing all-in-one commerce platform that enables you to become your own boss. Shopify is the platform helping millions of people worldwide fulfill their dreams of becoming entrepreneurs. So whether you're selling lanyards or playing cards, Shopify is ready to support your success every step of the way. Shopify simplifies how you can sell products both in-store and online, and helps to grow your business by bringing everything under one digital umbrella. With its simple dashboard and shop-ready point of sale system, managing orders and payments becomes effortless. Shopify will even help you push sales on social media channels like Instagram and TikTok. Using Shopify's simple customization tools, Shopify helps you stay ahead of trends no matter how big you grow your business. Using Shopify's simple customization tools, Shopify helps you stay ahead of all the trends. So no matter how big you grow your business, Shopify is here to help. So what are you waiting for? Get started today. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. Let's move on to talk about the US. We've got the US election in a couple of weeks. It feels like when Joe Biden was carefully shunted aside, there was a bout of, I think you could call it Kamala mania. I mean, certainly the US media were going absolutely wild for this exciting young candidate who doesn't really have anything to say. But that seems to be dying a little bit. Like the polls are narrowing, certainly in a lot of the swing states. Trump is edging ahead of Harris. Tom, why has it floundered so much, do you think?
I think it's obvious, which is that she's a terrible, terrible candidate. Now, obviously, to say that Trump has his limitations is an understatement. But at the same time, she is very Keir Starmer-like, as you're sort of alluding to, insofar as she's swung wildly between different positions between the last time she ran for the nomination and this time around having secured it. When the Bernie Sanders wing of the party was in the ascendancy, she was in favour of single-payer healthcare, and she was in favour of various very progressive, supposedly, border policies and so on. She's now had to swing drastically back in the other direction. People don't really know what she stands for. And the other thing which the Harris campaign have been quite smart not to themselves lean into the identity politics arguments, not to present her and for her to make the case that by elevating a mixed race woman to the presidency, this would be a fantastic healing moment for America. But they have let the outriders do that pretty consistently. So you had these hilarious, cringeworthy Zoom calls, white dudes for Harris, and so on. And I think that's still necessarily been a part of the campaign. And as soon as they're leaning into those, you start to see them repeating the mistakes of 2016, where you had Hillary Clinton very explicitly trying to treat the electorate as if they were just ethnic gender blocks, and saying, we've got a Hispanic celebrity who's in favour of me, and we've got a black celebrity who's in favour of me, why aren't you voting for me? That was essentially what happened, and they seem to be repeating that. The last couple of weeks I think have been really interesting in terms of they've had this concerted effort to court black male voters in particular. Again, this really grim kind of racial bean counting that seems to go on when they deal with elections, because that's always been a fundamental weakness for Harris. That's why she barreled out of the primary process last time round, even before it got to the primary, because she was struggling to pick up support amongst African-American voters, African-American men in particular. And Trump is gaining. There was one poll not too long ago, commissioned by the NAACP, no less, who found that a quarter of black men under 50 were considering voting for Trump this time around. So what I think the Democrats are perhaps going to be forced to learn once again is that this identity politics appeals very little to precisely the identities they claim it serves. And I'm not predicting the outcome on the basis of this. It's going to be incredibly close. And as with the last couple of elections, it will come down to somewhere between 60 and 80,000 voters in a handful of swing states to be the difference. But it's been fascinating seeing them repeat all of the same mistakes over again, just in a slightly more muted fashion than they did in 2016.
Although I am excited for the Kamala Harris's Black Men's Opportunities program. I don't know if people have seen some of the
opportunity agenda. Yeah,
the Black Men Opportunity agenda, including it's going to make it easier to buy and sell weed, and the government is going to look after your cryptocurrency investments. So I don't know who the hell comes up with this stuff.
I don't know. I was reading about the marijuana thing today, and yeah, on the face of it, I was like, is that not incredibly insulting and patronising? But a lot of black men are in prison for weed-associated misdemeanours, and
many of them put there by Kamala Harris. No,
yeah, I mean, it's a straightforward bribe, but I think she's in a position that Starmer was in before, in that she's got to try and keep together a coalition of wildly different factions. Obviously, there's a part. I mean, she's probably lost the sort of Sanders left, who are now outraged about American funding Israel. She's probably lost them anyway, but she's trying to keep that together. So she's not going to say anything specific. We seem to be in this situation where no one will say anything specific about what they're going to do because they don't want to lose some part of their tribe, and they've already got the tribe. So why would they cause further divisions? Yeah. And there's a sort of assumption you're not going to bring anyone new in, but she's sort of trying to appeal to the more socially conservative middle class in the American sense base by getting Tim Walz in to talk in that sort of folksy knucklehead kind of way, as he does.
Your dad.
Yeah. But it is completely insubstantial, and when she's actually pressed on any point, she seems to fall apart.
Graham, you're not excited for the joy that President Harris is going to bring to the world?
I actually don't think it's going to be close. I think Trump is going to win comfortably because apparently a lot of people who intend to vote Trump don't say so in polls. So if it's close now, I think that's going to widen by the time it happens. And also, I think this is a battle of administrations. Kamala has been in charge of this bizarre administration. Rachel Levine as health, or what is she again? Health some
kind of health role.
Something to do with the health. He is currently the subject of a lot of scandal. That's going to get worse. I think it's going to go to the Supreme Court. What's just happened in Alabama, where again. People are just finding out that eunuch is actually a gender according to WPATH, and I just think that people are going to look at the lunatics. Remember Sam Brinton who stole the luggage? Does anyone know the story? Yeah. So the people who don't, he was something to do with nuclear power, and he was non-binary. And one day, a fashion designer was watching TV after having her luggage stolen, and she saw him at a gala and said, "That's my dress," and he eventually got turfed out because of this. So this is the Kamala administration, and then on Trump's side, you have Vance, who, however people try to pretend he's weird, is actually quite together on many issues. And you also have, Kennedy, you know? And thank God Kennedy isn't president, because I don't think any of us could have listened to that voice for too long. But he is, again, a very capable and clever man. And I think people will go, well, we have this, this administration run by someone who's entirely incapable of being president, but he does seem to have been advised. Have you noticed he's quieter? He chooses his moments. His joke about Tim Walz the other day, oh my God, that was, did anyone hear that one? Oh my God, I can't believe I get the chance to tell you this joke. He said, I used to think the Democrats were weird for thinking that men have periods, and then I met Tim Walz. I mean, he's throwing darts that are absolutely devastating. Another one he did was that brilliant ad where they said, Kamala Harris is for they, them, we're for you, something like that. Again, it's just open goals, just lobbing them in. And I genuinely think it won't even be close in the end.
And thinking about those sort of crazy policies, I think, Kamala was accused of essentially wanting to fund the transitioning of illegal migrants who are in detention.
That was
and
really
everyone
interesting.
would obviously, when that was brought up, obviously everyone said that's rubbish. That's kind of Trumpian bullshit. But
then they had the video. I mean, that's the thing about him at the moment. He's in a strange position where some of the things that everybody assumes are insane that he's saying are actually democratic policies. So it's extraordinary.
And Rakib, I guess the flip side to Harris struggling with black voters and ethnic minority voters is Trump being surprisingly successful. Not being the majority by any means, but people might not expect that if they think if they think of him as this racist, I guess.
Absolutely, I think that one stat from the last presidential election which shocks many people is the fact that 30% of Muslim Americans voted for Trump. There's all this talk about the Muslim immigration ban and all the rest of it. And I think that the issue here is that the Democratic Party leadership is far removed from many of the socially conservative values among different non-white groups. I think that we talk about the label Hispanic, which is quite diverse in itself, actually. I think that if you really drill down to the specifics, I think very well-established Cuban-American communities, for example, they'll be quite an important voter constituency ahead of the next election. And in recent times, they've been moving towards the GOP. And I think much of that is because, of course, they're entrepreneurial, many are business owning. That definitely feeds into it. But I think that they have quite traditional views on the sanctity of life, for example. And if they'd voted Democrat before, they realised that the leadership and the general prevailing trend of thinking on those kind of issues doesn't reflect their own socially conservative beliefs. And I think that if you look at swing states, I think Michigan, I think that the if you call it the Muslim American vote there could be very important. Now, I think the general thinking in American politics is instinctively pro-Israel when it comes to Middle Eastern affairs. If Muslim Americans not accept that, but they understand that's the reality, then they're going to think about other issues. They'll start being more about economic management will come into it. Policies on trans rights will come into it as well. And then looking at sort of abortion. Abortion is a much bigger issue generally in US politics compared to here. And I think when you look at those kind of issues, they might feel that, actually, I think Donald Trump might reflect my views better on these kind of issues possibly than Kamala Harris. And I think Graham makes the point that you have this vast country, this huge electorate, but because the mechanics behind the Electoral College vote, and Tom mentioned this as well, it might go down to the tens of thousands of voters within those very critical swing states. And actually, I think that's where I think Kamala Harris really has to improve upon if she wants a chance of winning this forthcoming presidential election. And I think that's where Trump's strengths may well lie. You have to look at those particular communities in those critical swing states. That's where it really counts.
And just to tack onto that quickly, it remains my favourite counterintuitive point about Donald Trump. And this isn't my observation, it's David Shaw, a Democratic Party progressive pollster, is that he has single-handedly begun the process of racial depolarization of American politics. Like up until 2016, in terms of the Republican and Democratic vote, very racially sorted to quite an alarming degree. And his entrance into politics and some longer term forces as well, the supposed fascist, racist, deplorable and so on, has sent people in the other direction, which shows, if nothing else, that fear mongering coming from the Democratic Party just isn't working. Aside from what you think about Trump, it's clearly not working. And I think a lot of it is to do with the more bread and butter issues that people do care about. They don't see everything through the lens of their own narrow identity, let alone the claims that are being made about on their behalf by various Democrats or people in the media.
Yeah, and if I could just make a quick point, after the so-called war on terror following 9/11, I think the GOP's Muslim American support, it fell to single digits. And so you can see that one of the greatest achievements, quite remarkably, that Donald Trump has made, he's helped to rebuild the GOP's Muslim American support. So and that doesn't get covered very much in the more progressive sections of the American media. But I'd reiterate that point. I think that traditional, well-established Hispanic voters, not just of Cuban ancestry, I think you'd even look at it'd be very interesting to see how Mexican American support, how that lands along the southern border, especially the Texas-Mexico border. I think Trump might even have an advantage there as well, and that would be a very interesting outcome.
I mean, it's all very well us having this nice conversation, but isn't fascism possibly coming in about 3 weeks' time? Are we underplaying the threat that the world's most important economy is going to fall to something akin to or worse than the worst regime in the world? I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. No. But the fascism discourse, what do you make of that? Kamala has said recently that Trump is about fascism.
I think it's preposterous. I mean, the word fascism is massively overused, and the Republican Party doesn't have a recent history of flirting with fascism, particularly. The US Constitution is pretty tight in terms of, I mean, you can say there's many anti-democratic elements, but the idea that something radical has changed, in the last few years. And in fact, a lot of the anti-democratic movement clearly is coming from Democrats rather, and their kind of patrician identity politics, speaking for the masses, using celebrities as kind of symbolic of some voter bloc, all of that. So yeah, it's just rhetoric. It's annoying and it's counterproductive. And I don't know why. I mean, it's not as strong as when Clinton was running. Yeah. It's they've learned. There's a reason she put Tim Walz in that place. And in fact, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz is where the interesting discussion is happening. Yeah. I see that socially conservative minorities are voting for Trump, but I don't think it's because they positively know what he stands for.
It's more of a distrust of the Democratic Party.
It's more like I don't want to be with them. So it was. I mean, who knows where we could be if we actually had a functioning Republican president as opposed to a crazy person.
I mean, it's important to stress Donald Trump's personal unpopularity. That shouldn't get lost.
I mean, it's absolute travesty. This is their choice.
When Hillary ran against Trump, apparently they had trouble finding a line that they could use that would, get people going about her, And the one they eventually came up with was, because it's her turn.
Because she's worth it.
But I feel like that's a similar thing with Kamala. Again, what we were saying about Keir, the shape of the politician, the first female black president, but it's just not igniting people. And the use of celebrities is so counterproductive.
Yeah, like Mark Cuban, for example.
Yeah, or what's that guy who played the Hulk? Forget his name. Yeah, Gruffalo. Gruffalo. Yeah, Mark Gruffalo. But the thing is, if you look at the Oscars, they're thinking of getting rid of them because the viewing figures are so small. Celebrities are not what they used to be. And their endorsement means very, very little to people these days. So again, it's this thing of people thinking it's still 2016. And it's,
They haven't learned from the mistakes of 2016. I think that's why for the Democratic Party. Yeah. But just to follow up on Kathleen's point, I thought the vice presidential debate between Walz and Vance was actually a very good watch. Actually, there's a lot of policy substance in there, but there's lots of gestures of goodwill between the two as well. I know that people say, it was a more mature politics and that shuts people up, but I think it was genuinely quite refreshing to see they're really digging into the policies respectfully, disagreeing with one another as well. There's no trading of personal insults, and they ended the debate on a very positive note between the two of them as well. And I think that was actually quite pleasing to see. While with Harris and Trump, I thought for far lower standard, just from an intellectual level, based on their debate.
Yeah, and I suppose a lot of the Harris campaign, until quite recently actually, has been the sort of ersatz campaign, as you've been saying, sort of celebrities. She didn't even do a time profile. She's done a few interviews now. Tom, she recently did this interview on Fox where for the first time actually she'd been scrutinised. She's come unstuck a little bit.
No, absolutely. And you just saw why they haven't allowed her to do any interviews watching that interview. It's just because, first of all, because the charges that are laid at her door in terms of policies that she was personally responsible for and the disastrous consequences, policy positions that she used to hold, which she's now trying to disavow. She's banged to rights on all of these things and she has no kind of convincing argument. And what I think is interesting, and who knows how this will pan out, but we're now in the stage, talking about repeating the mistakes of 2016, of the Democrats browbeating voters for not being as excited about it. So did anyone see this thing from a couple of weeks where you had Barack Obama was sent out to admonish black men for not being as excited, and basically said, I think it's because you guys aren't feeling the fact that it's going to be a woman president. So it's just the fact that they keep going back to the deplorables playbook is fascinating and sums up everything that they refuse to learn.
Of course, I suppose the way they'd see it is that actually they didn't make any mistakes in 2016, and this is all a result of misinformation, disinformation. That came up a lot in the Harris-Waltz debate. There is a sort of fear that, of course, America has the First Amendment, but there might be some ways that the government could lean on social media if a Democratic administration comes in. I mean, there are those kind of fears around, the threat to free speech potentially.
I mean, the things have changed, right? So you can tell that Kamala is trying to build bridges, first of all, by her appointment of Waltz and symbolically, and secondly, by the way that she keeps saying, like, if you've got any good ideas, tell me, I'll listen. She's a bit desperate. But, she's saying we've got to get past all these divisions. We've got to come back together. She's trying to play to the very disgruntled middle classes who are fed up with all that, whereas Hillary was just sort of high on her own supply, just could not understand why this was happening when she'd done everything right. So there is a difference, and they do know what's at stake now, and they do understand vaguely, but it's a matter of keeping everyone together, and this is a very split society, so arguably you can't.
Graham, you're afraid of the fascism to come?
Well, where was it a few years ago? I mean, you look at the Democrats. Roe versus Wade was destroyed under the Democrats. The authoritarianism of the left at the moment is off the scale. So I'm kind of not so much. I'm not. I was real Trump derangement syndrome the first time he won. I couldn't sleep the whole night. I thought the world was going to end. And I'm sure there were, I didn't really, I kind of checked out because I was so depressed about it for a while. But as time went on, I just started realizing that a lot of the stories I was being told were untrue, sometimes outrageously exaggerated, and also something I'm very familiar with, which is intense focus on the things that proved the left-wing media's argument. So I remember there were all these stories about they met Indian leaders under a painting of one of the worst generals in the that type of thing in the American when the Indians were being wiped out, and it was like, well, did they really? Was that deliberate? Was that do you know what I mean? And there were constantly these stories, and I fell for all of them. I thought that the White House had been invaded by 4chan trolls, and it just turned out to be not true. He was definitely not a good president, really. But again, I just think that this time he's surrounding himself with good people. He may not fire them in a knee-jerk way, because I don't really think he put a lot of thought into his first term. But this second term, I don't know. I think he's been trained, and I think you might see him slightly fade into the background while people like Vance and Kennedy come forward. I could be wrong, but that's what it seems. That's what I'm predicting.
One of the big fake news stories, which often gets forgotten about now, was Russiagate. Of course, this idea that he was this Russian agent of some kind, or that Vladimir Putin had installed him in the.
Well, they ignored Harris's son losing his laptop to
Biden's son.
Oh, sorry, Biden's son, excuse me. Biden's son losing his laptop to, what was it, crack dealing prostitutes or something? That maybe should have been a scandal. I don't know. It's weird. And it's another thing of everything we do is fine, everything they do is evil. And
Yeah.
I've had enough of it.
Hillary's emails as well,
Yeah.
to be fair.
Yeah.
Rakib, final thoughts on US before we move on?
I think that we've focused a lot on we'd say that the poor quality of the presidential candidates on offer. But I think there's something to be said about the American media as well. I think the right-leaning American media doesn't really hold many of its Republican Party figures to account when they clearly behave in a very irresponsible way. And equally, you talk about the progressive elements of the media, I think they engage far too much in identity politics. And I think that when there's just generally, when you look at the ongoing policy debate, there's many American communities that suffer much like many of the poorest communities here we have in modern Britain. There's just very serious problems in terms of substance addiction. There's just such a fundamental lack of aspiration. They've experienced such serious forms of industrial decline as well. And it would just be nice to, not only here, but also in the United States as well, to see the policy debate maybe move in that direction. How can we address these social and economic problems, and how can we help people there in terms of maximising their potential? I just think that it would be nice if it moved in that direction, in my view.
By backing up people's cryptocurrency investments, of course.
Well, listen, I'll just make that final point. It's an opportunity agenda there. And I think the fact that this is a 5-point plan, and this is the kind of points that you'd prioritise, when there's very little on sort of improving educational standards in the inner city projects. How that didn't make the top 5, I'm not.
But isn't it
really
because the devil's in the detail and all those complicated things? They are much, much more complicated. Whereas if you say we're going to legalise marijuana, it's like everybody understands what that is. They may not understand what it means, but they understand what it is. So I can see, I agree with you, completely agree with you. And I actually think both sides are guilty of focusing, and I know it's ironic for me to say this, on the gender stuff. It's not the only thing that's going on in the States.
And the Democrats are so, I think, particularly poorly placed to listen to those kind of fundamental economic and social questions, because they become such an oligarchic party in quite a short space of time. This is where all the money is. This is where all the donors are. It's become the
quite
party
a lot of money in the
world.
Republican side as well.
But if you talk about the money from big tech, if you're talking about all these, but the donations from the last time around, the way in which they skewed towards Biden was tremendous. And it was a reminder as well, if we're talking about slogans from 2016, the Clinton campaign at one point came out with the slogan in response to Trump, "America is already great." Just, at a point in which people were seeing their communities ripped apart by deindustrialization, all these issues. And I think, again, it just speaks to how cut off they are. And I think that's why they can find themselves being distracted by some of the more cultural war issues that we find ourselves talking about a lot more disproportionately.
I also think that, similar to Badenoch, and I do think Badenoch, well, maybe I've just read different things to others because we all craft our own, Twitter feeds or whatever. But it seems to me that Badenoch really gets attacked on especially on racism. They're doing this incredible thing where they're trying to frame her as a racist, and the reason I think they're doing that is they are terrified that the culture war issues that we're talking about will now be discussed, right? And they do not want that to happen, because it's going to show the level of corruption over the last 5 years where these people have ignored all these issues. And Trump is the same. Him and the right at the moment are enjoying this great, they've acquired a new reputation as the people who love free speech and the people who want to hear your voices. You see things like Charlie Kirk in the US having students come up and getting into debates with students where he's entirely reasonable and trying to tease out what they mean, and they're not rude or anything like that. They're just talking. And this is what I think the left finds very frightening at the moment, because once people start talking about this, I think there's a large group of scandals that have just been baking away. The WPATH files, for instance, I think is a massive scandal that people just haven't realised yet, So
it's not gonna. I'm just gonna play devil's advocate. It's very big in our lives, right? But just because it's big in our lives doesn't mean it's big in the average American life. The economy is the thing that people care about the most.
Oh, absolutely.
And neither side is saying much about what they're going to do in that respect. Trump has obviously got the edge in the sense of people believe that he understands how to make money, and he understands the economy. He's got all this sort of credentials through his life, but he doesn't. He's a multi-billionaire. I don't know, but he doesn't give a shit.
No,
I don't
sure.
believe they think he gives a shit about the economy either. And as what Trump will do, his policies are about as vague as Harris's. I mean, he's flirted with, what is it, the 2025 project? I can't remember what it's called, but basically...
Well, they would strenuously deny that. Well, this
well, there's some ambiguity about whether they are signed up to it or not, but, it would have at least fleshed out some of these issues that we now don't know about. So...
But to push back on that a little bit, like I know, obviously, it is my hobby horse, this issue, and
it's mine too.
Well,
It's a great one to have.
yeah, but like something like WPATH, which is supposed to be the world leader for trans healthcare, linking to a page of child pornography. I don't think people realize. I'm not. How many? Just curious there. How many? By applause. Who knew? Who knew that? Right. Okay. But like,
of course they do. There is a Spiked Online
unusual, extremely sophisticated and intelligent audience.
And
why-
gorgeous now, so.
I think we should just
But why
generally
isn't
not
a
make
bigger
this...
scandal? It's
America tolerates a lot of pornography.
I know, but
I
child
won't-
pornography. I don't know. I just think that, but by an actual, the supposed leader of trans healthcare in the world, and they're linking to a page. It was something like 5,000 short stories. 40% of them were tagged minor. These are short stories about cutting people's penises off by people who are cutting kids' penises off.
And even if it's not the only issue, I think the culture war does matter as far as for a lot of voters. It's a kind of signal of has this particular politician, has this particular party gone categorically insane on certain of these issues.
Yes.
And that does mean something to people. If they feel like they've been lied to on a particular issue and then someone has the guts to say this is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
If they feel like they've been divided up, set against each other, and someone comes along and says, we're not going to, we reject this. It's not to say that any of the politicians we've been talking about today have necessarily covered themselves in glory on these issues at all times, but it's just going by recent electoral results, recent electoral upsets. The culture war has intruded on even electoral politics in quite a significant way, to the point where I can't think we can just dismiss it as something that we talk about here, but no one else talks about.
I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that there are other things as well.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think I'll just make the very final point, because I know you want to move on to the next segment. I think that if the presidential candidates were Vance and Walz, I think we would have had a better debate on those kind of very critical issues of education, employment, what are the main barriers to social mobility, which are all very big issues in the United States. I think we would have had a more informed debate if those two were presidential candidates.
I want to talk about the Middle East, the death of Yahya Sinwar in particular, a huge moment in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Sinwar, the architect of October 7th. Tom, what have you made of this?
No, it's a tremendous moment. The assassinations of Hassan Nasrallah from Hezbollah, Mohammed Daif, the leader of the Al-Qassam brigades within Hamas. Various Hamas leaders have now been wiped out. Ismail Haniyeh as well, who was killed in Tehran. Over a quite short space of time, you've seen the Israelis wipe out the entire sort of leadership class of both Hamas and Hezbollah. And of course, in the case of all of these gentlemen, but certainly Sinwar, it couldn't have happened to a bigger scumbag. I mean, this is tremendously, for lack of a better phrase, evil individual. The architect of October the 7th, as you say, the most barbarous and deadly assault on Jews since the Holocaust. It's also worth saying he's one of the people who is primarily implicated in the brutal repression of Palestinians themselves in Gaza. He rose up the ranks of Hamas because he was the man who would basically enforce not only Islamist sort of blasphemy codes and so on quite brutally, but also gain the reputation as the butcher of Khan Yunis because of his willingness to murder anyone who was even vaguely accused of being some kind of informant. And I think even in some of the reports that you've seen, even in quite liberal outlets, the number of people they've been able to find even in Gaza who are willing to effectively welcome this development because they feel, as much as they don't like the IDF, they feel like Hamas and Sinwar in particular have brought this hellfire down on their heads, I think is incredibly significant. And as ever at this point, because of how much various kind of Western influences have been sucked into this conflict that they knew nothing about 6 months ago. It's even online, you're seeing kind of simps for Sinwar, people talking about how he made this noble stand at the end because of this quite striking drone footage of him, his final moments and so on. But generally speaking, I think it's fascinating how much of an impact this particular conflict continues to have in our own domestic politics, our own online culture war, and I don't think that's going anywhere either.
He threw a stick at a drone, which is like it's defiant. Last stand, Kathleen. What do you?
Yeah, well, I'm not a simp for Sinwar. It's extremely difficult to talk about the Middle East without, as soon as you say something, then you're immediately on the hook for what you didn't say, what you didn't think. And people also think that positions line up very neatly. So if the first thing you say is, I'm glad he's dead, he was clearly an evil man, then that lots and lots and lots of things must follow about your position with respect to Israel or to people in Gaza. And the world doesn't need a beige statement of, oh, it's all awful either, but it is all fucking awful. And I mean, if his death helps reach a peaceful period where ultimately they still need to be working towards a two-state solution, that's the only possible outcome there, then good. I am not in international relations. But what I do find, with respect to your second point there, is interesting and actually counterproductive is the way that people, it seems to me, on the right are casting about for whatever the left likes or thinks and thinking, well, we're not doing that and we hate them and therefore we must be on the other side, so it is possible to be pro-Palestinian, still think that Hamas are
a terrorist
barbaric and a terrorist organisation, but that also one can have grave concerns about what Israel's doing and not equate Israel with Jewish people and find a space to be able to talk about being critical of the Israel government. And even the project of Zionism itself, it doesn't automatically make you anti-Semitic if you are critical of that project, depends on how you do it. All of that is almost impossible to say, and certainly not online. So my small contribution is to keep pointing things like that out, that this is not a you're over there or you're over there and there's nothing in between us. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I think you'd hope that the natural pro-Palestinian position is anti-Hamas. I mean, that seems logical. If you care about Palestinians.
You wouldn't get that indication some of the time. It is worth saying. I mean, the way in which particularly the section of the left in the UK have been particularly exercised by this issue. The organisations who were particularly concerned about Palestine, the Labour left and so on. It's not an exaggeration to say they've been explicitly in favour of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
Some have it.
The Stop the War, the Stop the War Coalition is the key organisation, which not only kind of opposing the war on terror and so on, but also getting involved in Palestine solidarity and so on. It's not just Jeremy Corbyn and the Hamas, our friends from Hamas and Hezbollah. That quote actually runs a little bit longer, where he refers to Hamas as an organisation which is devoted to social justice and political justice and peace in the region. I will hope that he has reassessed that at this point in time. Lindsay German, who was the chair of the Stop the War Coalition after he stepped down, made a speech in 2006 in which she said, as much as I have my disagreements with Hamas and Hezbollah, nice to know, when it comes down to it, I'm with them, because to be on the side of democracy in the Middle East is to be on the side of Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, aside from being morally suspect, it's just factually wrong to suggest these organisations are democratic. So it's not to say you tire everyone with one brush. And that happens all the time.
I'm glad that you say that.
These are the representatives and the organisations, it is worth pointing that out.
Well, it's worth pointing that out, but it's also worth pointing out the way that the right will call a massive demonstration in central London with a range of elements, including people carrying CND signs. We'll call it a hate march.
And call to ban it as well, which is absolutely.
And they want to ban it, and they were the ones supposed to care about free speech.
I think Swallow Brodman was complaining about being cancelled somewhere, it was like Cambridge or something like that. I said, listen, you call them hate marches, you wanted to ban them as well.
Yeah.
And I think
the whole coconut thing, people suddenly went very, very quiet when that woman was arrested for that.
There is no shortage of free speech hypocrites.
Yeah, but it's worth pointing it out. And it's worth pointing out that in the logic of this requires that you take the worst possible elements, you say, right, well, they were there, so everyone else, hundreds of thousands of people must be thinking like that person.
I've never seen anyone say that.
But there's a dynamic here. There's a dynamic around. And I think it's worth.
If you call a demonstration a hate march, you are providing a portrayal of it being collectively hateful towards Jewish people. And I think that there was no doubt in my mind there were elements of the demonstrations which are clearly extremist, and they were under-policed. But I don't think the reaction that was to call for the demonstrations to be banned completely, which is too far in the other direction. I agree completely with Kathleen. I think that people really underestimate how complex the dynamics are in the Middle East in general. And I think that in terms of Hamas, I think you very correctly identified, Tom, that there's a great deal of suffering at the hands of Hamas among Palestinian people. There's no two ways about that. I think just looking forwards, if you want to talk about a sustainable peace settlement in the Middle East, no way can it include Hamas and Hezbollah. I'd have to say as well, in no way can it include Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich. And I think that we have to be very clear about that. It would require fundamental changes in political leadership and thinking, if you call it, on both sides. I think we just have to be honest about that. And I think that also, there's many people that, the frustrating thing is that if you look in Israel as well, that government is not a popular government, especially after what happened on October 7th, the Hamas-led terrorist attacks. And there have been various sort of corruption-related scandals as well. And I think it's very important to note that there are Israeli civic society organizations, for example, they campaign against the expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank. They're doing that. Well, what's really interesting is that you have some pro-Israeli, I don't even say pro-Israeli, but this particular pro-Israeli government campaigners here for this current government of Israel, they don't even talk about that. And I think that to overlook that, if you're very serious about securing a sustainable peace settlement in the Middle East, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah are proscribed terrorist organizations in the UK. I've always been very clear about that. But I think you also have to make that this illegal expansion, it is illegal expansion of settlements, militarized settlements as well, where you have the security minister essentially handing them guns. As well. I think we have to be very clear about various forms of militaristic occupation and population displacement at the hands of this Israeli government. I think we just have to be very truthful about that. And I think that you can very much be supportive of the existence of Israel, but think that there's a lot wrong with this current Israeli government and some of its cabinet members who think that they're fanatical extremists.
And many Israelis will agree with you.
Exactly, and then that is the point. And that you could also say that, listen, I support Palestinian statehood, but I don't think Hamas should be involved in the governance, especially in the Gaza Strip. I think that a lot of that nuance, and I think that it's such a minefield to try and navigate these waters. I think what we need in the UK, especially, we just need a more nuanced conversation and actually give freedom for people to articulate their points fully. And I'm very glad that this platform has allowed me to do that.
Absolutely. Graham, final point on this before we go out to the audience.
Well, my big worry about it is not really, obviously us talking here and even, politicians are not going to sort out the problems in Israel. But what I do think we can do is push back on a little bit of the glee that was felt after October 7th. There were people out on the streets supporting Palestine the next day. The bodies were still warm. And it's the 10-year anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo massacre. And I saw the same thing play out there. There was like a day or two of sympathy, and then it disappeared as American Twitter users started misrepresenting what Charlie Hebdo was doing. This time, there wasn't even a pause. They were out the next day. I found that really frightening. I think, and I don't know who said it. You may remember, but one person said, we need to normalize massacres. These are very, very frightening death cult type phrases. And I found them, clearly you wouldn't, ban them, but they should be much more heavily policed. And they should be, I don't know, I just think in the days after October 7th, I was really ashamed of what I was seeing in the West, throughout the Western world,
Right. Lots to chew on there. It's now your turn to say something, ask questions, make points, but do keep them brief because we really don't have that much time. Can I see some hands? Who wants to speak? Someone, right next to the mic there.
Hi there, everybody. George Fielding. For those viewers that can't see at home, I'm a proud wheelchair user, and for reasons that I'll go on to quickly demonstrate, Kathleen, I have a lot to thank you for. So, as you've discussed in the debate, we have an authoritarian Prime Minister who has co-opted kindness and led people to believe through previous position that he knows the law, yet he doesn't really know the kind of vision and the kind of law that he wants to implement. And as a centre-left, supposedly centre-left Prime Minister, the first thing he's going to do is lead on legislation and vote through legislation that will lead to the unnecessary euthanasia of vulnerable and disabled people. And he will do so because, as Wade Streeting has said, we do not have a fit-for-purpose NHS. We have a threadbare social care system. 1 in 3 local authorities are going to go bust in the next few years. So there's no opportunity, there's no infrastructure to put the safeguards in place and actually implement the safeguards that would keep people with disabilities, who are 1 in 6 of the population, safe in our system. So I can point all of this out, as I did on GB News and now on Spiked. As a centre-left person, politics changes quite quickly in 21st century Britain. But the one thing I can't articulate is, if, other than the sanctimony of human life, how am I meant to communicate and demonstrate the value of people the value of life of people with disabilities, because we are not in the workplace. We cannot be in the workplace. We are not so facilitated to be in the workplace. So other than the sanctimony of human life, we've lost the argument around capitalistic value. So the question is, how would you suggest, as people that clearly are on the right side of this issue, I communicate the value of people with disabilities' lives?
Thank you so much. We'll take a couple of questions and then come back. So anyone else? Hands? Yep, someone there? Gentleman there?
Hi. Two kind of questions, kind of points, really. Before I make my points, my questions, what you said there, the gentleman there, you shouldn't have to prove your validity. Everybody's a human being. That should be self-evident, but it's not. Just going back to the earlier part of your debate about the emptiness of Keir Starmer and his government, and the DEI stuff that's probably going to come into law. In reality, most of this stuff already exists. It exists in most modern workplaces. All of this about getting leave and flexible working, it exists already. So it just illustrates just how empty the Labour government is. My conception of it is, when Blair came in, over a quarter of a century ago, his government was like cheerleaders for the management sector, for middle management. And now the government, the Keir Starmer government, the Labour government, they're taking their cue from managers, from corporate workplace managers. It really is that empty.
We have next person.
Sure.
We make 1 point each. Be nice to your fellow audience members.
Hi, I'd like to come back to the point that Graham was making earlier about WPATH. And there was a question that said, well, actually, does it matter? People are more interested in...
I didn't say, does it matter?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I don't want to misrepresent you, Kathleen. But the point was, there are lots of other things, that this isn't being made public. But I think it brings into question a much bigger point, which again comes back to the gentleman who was talking about disabilities, which is that if we ignore what's happening at WPATH, and it's not just about children who identify as transgender and how do we help those children, keep them safe, I think it brings into question a much bigger question about the whole concept of safeguarding for people in society, for vulnerable people, including children. And it seems to me that it's a really important moral component in our society, and it feels to me like that's being degraded and dismissed and so on. And I think that's something that we should all be really concerned about.
Yep. One more. Right at the back there.
Thanks, you'll be pleased. It's a very quick question. Just on the 2 elections that you've been discussing, I've got money on Kemi Badenoch winning the election, and I've got money on Kamala Harris winning the election as well. I'm able to cash out both of those bets, but I only really want to cash out one. Which one do you think I should cash out?
It's a great question.
It's a good question. We've already heard Graham's predictions, right? Badenoch for Prime Minister and Trump for President. Kathleen,
predictions, not
predictions, not we're not giving out financial advice. Kathleen, do you want to come back to the question on assisted dying? I mean, what do you find is the most powerful and persuasive argument, or how do you conceive this issue?
I think, well, I mean, I've written a long piece which I advise everyone to read, obviously in Unheard, about assisted dying, and I really did try to give it my best shot in laying out the arguments why this is a terrible idea in practice, given the system we have. I think it's tricky. I mean, we used to just take it as a given that every human life had value and it wasn't just reducible to what an individual thought now about their own life. Like, so someone with depression, we don't just say, oh, well, okay, well, you're depressed, you're probably right, you've got nothing to live for. If you don't think you do, then how can I convince you that you do? We didn't do that. But we're now moving to a point where the state basically will instantiate a position where we're not going to fight you if you want to kill yourself, and we're going to help you if you want to kill yourself. And we are not the arbiters, really, of whether you have the right to do it or not. And that is a terrible and disastrous state of affairs, particularly for people who society as a whole tend to discount as valuable in the first place. So at the same time, with respect to the gentleman's question, I think that unfortunately we're a bit kind of weary of emotive first personal anecdotes because we're deluged with them. Everyone's got a victim story. And we can no longer easily and reliably distinguish between the flashy ones that draw our attention, like the poor trans vulnerable person, versus the actual person in a wheelchair who can't get on a train and go anywhere. That's not as exciting to us. So there is a real problem with media attention, public attention, and a kind of weariness generally with stories that are about sad victims. And I don't think that's what this gentleman was suggesting that we tell anyway. So I don't have a solution to this. I'm just pointing out the dynamics that we've got to pay attention to the problems in this legislation and not look for the best. Don't assume we're going to get a utopia and the best possible solution. Safeguarding involves thinking of the worst that's going to happen. And that's actually more likely given the social care system, given the NHS, and given liberalism telling us that the market determines value. So.
Yeah, and given some of the precedents we've seen in other countries and things like that.
The slippery slope is so real on this issue, and it's really worth looking at some of the horror stories, certainly from Canada, which has got a lot of focus in recent years in terms of their medical assistance in dying MAID program. I mean, there was a story from a few years ago that really blew up in Canada because there was a gentleman called Amir Farsood who applied for the MAID program primarily because he was about to be kicked out of his house and he didn't want to be made homeless. Now, being homeless is not a criterion for qualifying for assisted suicide in Canada, but because he had a long-term back problem and various other forms of pain, he qualified on that basis. I think he even got the 2 doctors' sign-off that was required. But because so much attention was drawn to this story, without wanting to harp on about individual examples, because so much attention was drawn to it. And the reason I bring that up is because it demonstrates, I mean, they went from a very similar position to where the Labour Party want us to enter into, 6 months left to live, roughly speaking, terminally ill and so on, to now they're at some point in the future quite likely to introduce people who are mentally ill to be in some way, shape or form suffering with various forms of depression or what have you to qualify for MAID. So in a very short space of time that has happened, and it's happened in many of the jurisdictions in which it's been practiced. I think there's the question of the slippery slope and the state of end-of-life care and so on. But there's also, as you were talking about there, Kathleen, there's the sort of principles, the fact in which it feels like with the exception of religious people who tend to, for obvious reasons, be quite involved in the assisted dying debate, it seems there seems to be a complete absence of more secular people making the arguments for the importance of human life, why we shouldn't, as a kind of policy position, be suggesting that a certain form of life is almost less worth living because of the particular diseases or the particular health or mental health problems that they have. The complete absence of that kind of argument from that kind of humanistic argument, I guess, has been striking. What I think has left, unfortunately, a bit of an open goal for the supposed assisted dying campaigns to move through.
And why we shouldn't push people off bridges. This seems fairly straightforward argument to me. But anyway, Graham, is there anything you want to come on from the audience? Could be on assisted dying, could be on safeguarding, could be on
well,
the election.
I think all three people have a similar thing connecting them, which is that the Overton window has just been shifted way too far towards a dismissal of human life, normalized massacres, the assisted or the euthanasia argument. All these things are like trying to push it where it was already going. And so I'm very, very happy that there's people who are saying no further. There was a story I just found out today that there was a Paralympian in Canada who wanted a ramp put in his house, and they offered him the maid service instead, So, I just think that we are all, and again, just final point about what my argument was about the trans issue is that the press have just ignored it for 5 years. And my argument is that these things are going to come floating up, and we're going to discover a huge amount of scandals that people will be interested in. They just haven't heard them, And these are all things that are making that Overton window. I said slide. Windows don't slide. Yeah, they do slide, I guess. Just slide wider and wider.
The Overton screen doors.
Yes. The Overton screen door is just opening so wide that all sorts of horrors are going to come through it. So I'm glad that, Conservatives are around to say stop,
Rakib, final point of the...
No, final point. I think just in terms of where we talk a great deal about diversity, equality and inclusion, I think there needs to be a far stronger emphasis on disability, which is very much a forgotten, protected characteristic. And being quite an unusual description for myself, but being the Marxist social conservative, I think we really have to be careful and ultimately we have to resist the commodification of fellow citizens.
Well, thank you very much. We want to thank our panel, please.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.